The healthcare system in India is neither healthy, nor caring, nor a system. Has supervised and systematic neglect led to the rotten public healthcare today? What is the role of the corporate hospital when the middle class was willing to buy itself out of sickness? Do we even have a healthcare policy? All this and more in today's discussion. Calcutta Debating Circle presents a discussion on The Sickness of Health by Dr. Kunal Sarkar. Hello everyone. We have with us today a distinguished panel of young doctors, Dr. Shaba Hakim, Dr. Boyjoy Sain and Dr. Roshni Chakraborty, discussing Dr. Kunal Sarkar's latest book, The Sickness of Health. Calcutta Debating Circle presents this new lucid and objective commentary by Dr. Kunal Sarkar. In one of his many interviews, Dr. Sarkar actually said that he never paid attention to public health classes during his undergraduate days. In fact, he used to say that he depended on the notes of his other classmates, particularly of the opposite sex, who paid far more attention in his classes. I think today it's safe enough to say that Dr. Sarkar was certainly not being truthful, because he produced this wonderful book on where our healthcare policy stands today. And that is where we will start our discussion. Dr. Roshni Chakraborty will give her views on whether we have a healthcare policy, where it stands today, and Dr. Sarkar will offer his views on how healthcare actually came about to be.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Mayuri. So hello everybody. So today, to start with, it's a very important topic where we are starting as far as India is concerned and the healthcare sector is concerned. As I would like to say that the healthcare sector is right now at crossroads and the policy making is not right, and we need to take necessary steps because it's absolutely crucial, because that is what's going to determine the future for the India's healthcare system. Now, to see this in a larger perspective, if we see, we have already got some challenging problems as far as India is concerned in terms of demographics or the various disparity in case of income in every state, and different state have different kind of governance. So there is the desynchronization with the central and the state government already present. So because of which we have to work around these problems and find a solution towards a better tomorrow. Now, what something I find is at the center of this problem is that the participation of the public sector in the healthcare is very less, and because of this reason, the concept of health for all in this country is lacking. One particular thing is, suppose to make it more understandable, if we consider the national health policy that came about in the year 2017, that showed us a lot of tabulated, it had a lot of mandates where a lot of goals were set, a lot of targets were set that were to be achieved by 2022 or 2025. But the problem with this, these were ambitious goals, but who is going to do it, each of these, and how to go about it? There is a lacking in the explanation in the mandate, and also the budgeting that has been put forward in the Union Health Budget in 2018 is very less for a country like India, which is a huge population. Right now, the percentage of GDP that is being used for healthcare sector is around in the policy. It is mentioned in the National Health Policy of 2017-2018 that they want to increase it from 1.5% to 2.5%. This is written, but the recent, I remember reading an article by one of a very leading media portal. They have stated that in 2021 February article, they said that presently the amount of fund that is being allocated is only at 0.34%.
Roshni, thank you. I think those were very, very important observations, the sense of perspective. Now you see, for intention, default, good luck, bad luck, whatever it is, we are all animals trapped in a zoo, with the exception of Mayuri perhaps. So we have this habit of taking the zoo for granted, and most of the times looking at the zoo from inside. Now when we look at this zoo from outside, I think keeping things simple, we are a country 7 decades down the line, so we have to now have an intent for existence. And every other country, when did UK have the National Health Service? In the days of extreme turbulence, when they were about to lose India from their necklace of colonies. When did Japan get into public health care? Japan got into public health care during the Meiji Restoration of 1860s. When did Germany come into public health care? That is when Otto von Bismarck stepped into as the man of blood and iron. So I think our moment in history has perhaps come, that we've had a journey of bloodshed, a lot of turmoil, but we now have to make our mind up. We now have to make our mind up. Are we really wanting to provide health sustenance to the 1.3 billion people, etc.? If we do, if that is our social intent, then it has to have its sense of resources. And for that resources, is everything coming from the government? Or is it a part stakeholding, part government, part private? Now, exactly what you say is that has to come out not just by skirmish, not because somebody's fallen sick and you've got to beg and borrow and get into indebtedness to seek that treatment possible. So we've had enough of that. Some of it was inevitable because the country getting into its own first decade, first 20 years, etc., was understandable. But 73 years into the life of a nation, I don't think that is understandable anymore. And look at the current set of happenings. In COVID times, repeatedly we've had that much of money thrown at us in terms of COVID incentives, tranches, whatever it was. What percentage of the total economic outlay has been for health? 4%. Is that what we think of healthcare? When you are in the midst of the worst possible crisis, is that what you do to healthcare? So it has to, now we are living in these days of genetic manipulations. We perhaps have manipulated the viruses, now we are manipulating the vaccines. But the way I look at it, in the genetic code of India, this has to be firmly encoded, that it has to be a national social intent, that this is what we want to do and this is how we get around the job, because just leaving a set of helpless doctors at one end and a set of resourceless people at the other end, this is not the war you and I, we've had enough of it. So I hope your generation don't have to go through it days on end.
Taking from Roshni's point, there are 2 points that I would like to introspect into. One is she mentioned about the budget, which is covering the financial part. Other is the setting of the policies. Firstly, the COVID, the recent pandemic has been an eye-opener to all of us. Like, we can see how crippled the healthcare system was. Now it's just exposed. Like, some say it's on the ventilator, as it's quoted by. So one of the major reasons can be, as mentioned in the chapter that is on the healthcare policy, the confusion and the conflicts, is that the budget of the healthcare system is so crippled because since time immemorial, when the evolution of India took place, the independence took place, India has been having such friendly neighbors that the entire budget allocation is going into the defensive parts, whereas you spend 30 to 40% on GDP on the defense sector. The new scams unfolding day by day, first the Bofors, then some helicopters, then some flights, they're all coming up, but there's no particular thing related to the healthcare.
Yeah, Boyjik, if I may, just to make a short comment on this, I think a pipeline with that many leakage is going to have a defective output at the other end, and that takes account of all the corruption that we see, which is there, as I think it was Sir Jamshedji Tata once said, that corruption is also at times a social necessity. That doesn't come out of thin air. It comes because of various socioeconomic conflicts. But more importantly, in COVID times, what happened was the inconsistency of our policy became very threadbare, right? we are not just looking at a grossly inadequate funding. You know, it's all good to say young doctors are fighting, you are fighting, she's fighting, you are fighting, you are there, 1,500 lives lost. But beyond the tear-filled emotions, the question is, how much of armaments have we given you by way of financial allocation, by way of medical allocation, by way of critical care beds? I just, they're very interesting. I think I've made this point in one of the chapters. Not a single state in India, 30 states included, have so far, just look at how much healthcare capacity each state has got. Not a single state at any point of time has actually deployed more than 60% of its total available healthcare capacity to fight this pandemic, right? Look at the inventory and look at how much you've used. But why not? My suspicion is because a good part of that inventory does not exist. Today, in the same breath, if I tell you that the state, West Bengal, mind you, is a very atypical state in India. Our public sector is twice as big as the private sector. We are the only state.
Yes.
Perhaps memories of communism still lingers. But given the fact, even we have said, we claim to have about 8,500, 8,000 oxygenated beds, etc. But at no point of time that we could ever deploy more than 3,000. Why? Do they not exist? Or we do not have the manpower? Or we do not have the... And this is, West Bengal is because we are here, we happen to be here, we know the stats. It's happened everywhere. It's happened in Karnataka, it's happened in Punjab, it's happened in Maharashtra. So, in other words, not only are the resources lacking, but what you and I conceive to be the healthcare infrastructure in India, how much of that actually functionally exists is in doubt.
One point I would like to make, because while listening to Roshni, I also think that do we really have a policy or do we have social welfare schemes?
Coming to the policy point.
Yeah, I think, Sabha, if you look, it's a good question, and I think, I just wanted to be a provocateur who makes people of your age group ask this question. You have to. My generation simply did not ask this question. We were ever so happy to have got through the joint entrance. We were even happier to have gone through 4.5 years of pretty cheap, good education. I paid all of 50 rupees per month. I was supposed to pay 100 rupees because I had some scholarship or the other. I paid 50 bucks. So it was reasonably, as good as money could buy. I was so happy for it. And then the rest of it, putting bread on the plate. But at the end of the day, you see, we have to know the waters we are swimming in. We are doctors. Every day, today you are probably doing shift duties. In a few years' time, you will be absolutely first on the firing line. So all these questions inevitably will come back. So let these questions not haunt us. Let us address these questions. In 70 years, how many generations of doctors have come and gone? So fair enough. Sometimes you are healers, sometimes you are predators, sometimes you are prophets, sometimes you are criminals. So you have this bipolar existence. But the question has to be asked, and your question is so important, that is a policy emerging? My short answer to it at this point of time, in 2021, in the month of July, is still a succinct no. We are still undecided. Does health remain in the state list, or is it better off in the concurrent list? Today, out of the 1.1% or 1.3%, it is 60-40 centers to states. They are forever weeping on one another's shoulders. I'm spending more, you are spending less, I'll control you. As far as the pandemic is concerned, first 6 months we were controlling the orchestra like an imperious Zubin Mehta from the center. Then the Indian Philharmonic Orchestra of the pandemic melted away in the second phase. So India became 30 states with 35 different approaches to the pandemic. So this is a cruel but stark exposition of the fact that how erratic we are. In 1991, in Narasimha Rao's time, we were all waiting for privatization, foreign capital in healthcare. It came only in bits and fits. Because look, you have to be intellectually invested first before you get fiscally invested. Today, if you wanted a friend of yours to invest in something you are thinking, that person has to know that, look, does my ecosystem have a consistent policy? Today, your state wants to go hammer on tongs towards welfare-related healthcare. Your center wants to bring in private capital. Somebody else is saying, we want free flow of FDIs. Now, this augurs very well for somebody treating schizophrenia. But this does not augur well at all for a consistency in policy. And the end result will be that we just take a very circuitous route and end up to where we've started. But once again, people of your time and your generation has to ask the question from inside, not just, when there is a confrontation, doctor versus patients, doctor strike, people going on, why has the junior doctor been walloped, why is there so much of violence all around? These are not wartime questions, these are peacetime questions.
Hence, I think that this book comes at a very important trajectory of where we are at. Because this appraisal of healthcare was needed, and there was a vacuum when this book came in. And yes, it came at a time when things were difficult, but I think it serves for an important starting point for these conversations to happen. Because even though, as you say, as you paint the picture of how healthcare developed in the country, and erratic as it was, the way we see things, perhaps maybe the welfare schemes we have in a sea of capitalism, somehow that, provides a little bit of faith to some people. And as erratic as it is, the next thing that I think is very relevant to our discussion is, the identities, the specific identities that you describe in various funny anecdotes and otherwise, the development of the nursing home and what it means to the middle class, the entry of the corporate hospital, the unholy number of medicine shops and laboratory testing units crowding in front of hospitals for apparently no reason. So what is your take on these interesting developments and what they mean for?
These are interesting, but this has all come out from sort of Newton's sixth law of motion, which stated that necessity was the mother of invention. So why did we have nursing homes? Because look, all these places, like we have Medical College, SSKM in Kolkata, you have KEM in Mumbai, you have Madras Medical College in Chennai. All these places during colonial times, they were like, they were like the very exclusive facilities where only the privileged went in. You never had 3,000 patients in a government medical college OPD sometime in 1945 or 1946. So once we got rid of the colonial barriers, people had an expectation to healthcare. You had absolute overcrowding of the government medical colleges. The capacity did not expand. Obviously, why? Because our purse strings didn't permit us to, and we at the same time we had a kind of a reluctant growth of the middle class, right? So we had a reluctant growth of the middle class. So people who were managing to put a bread in the plate, they were a civil servant, a doctor and a lawyer or a businessman, whatever, they would not go and get into these cluttered sort of, smelly indoors and outdoors and get treated. So they found their own solution to the problems. They had the sort of recognized, popular doctors, small facilities, and they just grew up like shrubs all over the place.
If I may add a point.
So just, yes, of course, Boyjik, but one point I want to make over here, that both consciously and subconsciously something happened for which I have and you will continue to pay a high social tax for this, and that is commodification of healthcare. So when this went on, it was taken as obvious, what's the big deal? I'll get into a nursing home, I'll engage a gynecologist, an obstetrician for a delivery, a surgeon for a gallbladder, an orthopedician to fix my fracture. financial deal will happen, job done, go home, money paid. But this taken for granted process, imprinted in people's mind that medicine has been used and we are blamed for it. We have been blamed for it, you will be blamed for it. That medicine is a commodity that sells in the market. If you charge 5 rupees, I'll charge 7.5 and she'll charge something else. And this curse of commodification of healthcare, which is both a curse and a necessity, is something that has haunted our profession. And that is somewhere, we have alienated ourselves. We are all looking for trust. We are all looking at credibility. We are all thirsty to get the trust of the patients. But unless this is bridged, unless you come to the day that you are able to hold a patient's hand and say that you are going to have this treatment, irrespective of how thin or how fat your wallet is, this chasm of mistrust will not be bridged. Yes, Boji.
Yes, so one of the major fallacies that we have was the evolution of healthcare in India was out of necessity. It was not structured, it was always disorganized. We didn't have a pyramidal or the structure of healthcare, like from the primary healthcare till the tertiary care. There was no involvement of the GPs at first, and then like the NHS system or the Cuba system, where you have complete free healthcare for the people in Cuba, and in the NHS you have a pyramid structured way. Like if I have a chest pain, if I have a headache, if I have bone pain, if I have a stomachache, I go to the GP, the general practitioner. He escalates it. Whereas in India, it has been in bits and pieces. Like whenever you find a specialist, you'll go there and hog on to it. You'll find a bit of gynecologist there, you find a bit of cardiac surgeries, you hog on to that particular chest pain problem to that. So one of the major cause of this is because the healthcare system has been totally disorganized right from its inception.
No, Boji, as I said, we've been all brought up to accept a given, right? If you walk down the streets and you just walk down for a quarter kilometer, you've just walked beside about 25 medicine shops. Huh? This is bizarre. This is absolutely bizarre. This is singular madness. Even if Lewis Carroll wrote a 2.0 version of Alice in Wonderland, Lewis Carroll would not have ever dreamt that you can walk past a quarter kilometer of a road in the center of a city which has 50 medicine shops. What for? They're all selling the same thing. They're all cutting corners. They're all bribing the middlemen. They are trying to imprison you, in this back-scratching network, you and me. Inevitably, we are all human beings. We also have a stomach. I don't know if any of you have or not. You try to contribute to numerical humanity. You have a family, your social dependency, financial need increases. So there are so many givens that we have accepted. The status quo is very dangerous in Indian healthcare. One status quo is the need-based. You need it, you get it. Another thing is this clandestine pharmacy. Now, this is where I don't know how you look at it, Sabha. You've had a lot of experience in a government hospital. So how do you look at it? Doesn't it appear odd to you?
It is very odd because, as you said about the necessity thing, and I said about the schemes, the welfare schemes. The welfare schemes don't come in from the necessity of the people. It comes from the necessity of winning seats before elections. Mostly, you will see something happening like that. Whereas if we were more policy driven, money would be put into the government hospitals itself to increase the number of beds, to allocate the doctors properly. You have specialists who after post-graduation have to do a 3-year bond, whereas the requirement is more for an undergrad MBBS doctor than actually for specialists all over the state. There is a reason in a pyramidal structure, a tertiary center is less than the primary healthcare center, and our problem is most people do not trust the primary healthcare people, and that is also why the corporate structure came about, and it has become a very status driven thing where you want to say that, oh, I went to this doctor in this hospital for my operation. And it's the whole point of having a middle class. A middle class will always have aspirational goals where they would want to go to particular doctors in particular hospitals, even if those doctors are sitting in free clinics somewhere else, because a lot of doctors, even if we get a lot of criticism about it, at their core, when we all start on our journey, we all have this hope of changing the world for a better place. Otherwise, why would you go through the torture that is a medical training program?
Yeah, I think, you know, you've said it very well over there, but once again, you know, you and I, at the end of the day, you see, what if you really came from a middle class background, which perhaps I'm afraid most people who get into medicine, the 60,000-70,000 people whom we put through the grind every year, they perhaps do. But the question is that they also need to know the waters they are swimming in. You, at this stage of your career, all of you all need to be fairly aware and aligned to the ecosystem. An animal in a jungle is only as good as the ecosystem in which the otherwise, you know, if you saw the recent OTT film, you and I will get shot down as the man-eater who's actually been deprived of food, you know. So when I was watching the movie on the OTT platform, the recent Vidya Balan movie, you know, where they, so how wonderfully, so I think, you know, if a doctor walked on was a four-legged animal rather than being a two-legged animal, so that entire problem of a tiger in a forest could just be paraphrased for a medical career, our lives at this point of time. But then again, our hope is, where does hope lie? Our hope lies that people have gone over, societies have gone over the edge. Once again, it's very unfashionable to mention China these days. You know, you and I can use anything that China makes. We haven't used their vaccines yet, but it's very unfashionable to say China is a society which exactly, you know, 1947 India comes into being. I think 1948 People's Republic of China comes into being. So China went through the exact crossroads. You know, when first time I was in China, maybe about 6-7 years back, each and every one used to complain. They had a terrible burden of out-of-pocket payment. Like in India today, we have 60% out-of-pocket payment, all the indebtedness. Exactly. You know, I visited the largest cardiac unit in Asia that was working in the center of Beijing. You know, their emergency ward had about 70 people, all sort of laboring in various states of chest pain and breathlessness. Out of the 70 people, 50 of them, they said the relatives were missing. Why? They had gone home to get money. Not different, very different from ours. But within the last decade, they are changing their nuts and bolts. The same way that they had the Deng Xiaoping moment that came for Chinese economy, like the Deng Xiaoping moment for Chinese healthcare. I believe, you know, again, you take whatever China says with a barrel of salt, but they are changing gears, I believe. I was trying to fish out some data. The only data that you can believe perhaps out of China is the fiscal data. So China's out-of-pocket payment on healthcare currently has shrunk down to about 15% or 20%, what used to be exactly at Indian levels. Exactly at Indian levels, more than 50-60%. And you've raised a very important question. All the welfare schemes, politics is a risky business. But, you know, like Indian mythology, you know, Samudra Manthan, even out of every political great activity, something good comes out. I will tell you that my firm belief is, I'm very cynical, you know, like most of you of Indian politicians, but perhaps starting from Yashaswini, which happened in Karnataka in the 90s, then Arogyasri in Andhra Pradesh, then Kalaingar scheme in Tamil Nadu, and last but not the least, you know, I don't want to get into politics now, but honestly, if politics was an arm wrestle, as we saw in Bengal recently, I think the schemes of Bengal have completely flattened the central government schemes, simply because of the access. People have accessed it. You know, there is no great rocket science to it. You have a scheme, you have a lot of water, people are thirsty, you are selling water in a ZL, people have accessed it. Where else the other scheme, no matter how clever it is, very difficult to access. So I think the hope for all of us, we are not, we are not just critics with sharp canines. We have to shout at the top of our voices as long as we are in the profession, because if other societies, look at Thailand, how Thailand has gone around it. Look at the COVID characteristics in entire Southeast Asia and India. So I think we live in hope, and we only raise these questions. Many of them are pretty unpleasant and pretty sharp, but I think we have to raise these questions because your generation has to be the catalyst of this change.
One thing I would like to add, since we're talking about the welfare schemes, like Sir said, our present government in our state, the scheme that is there, we know about all of it, the Shastru Shati scheme, which has that concept of providing the healthcare for all. Everybody is included in this, which is very similar to what is followed in UK. But what the central government is doing with the healthcare scheme, it has more individual responsibility. It is on a one-on-one basis, which is very much seen in the US, and that has a problem to it, is that lack of awareness is there in our rural areas, and the urbanization is very limited to these cities, which is not the bulk population of India. So the people who actually need the accessibility to healthcare, they are completely unaware. So even if there is a healthcare scheme, they are not approaching it. They are still not. Even if it wants to cover 30 to 40%.
One thing is always, you and I as doctors are eternal optimists.
Yes.
I always try to look for the good news, and the good news is, I think it was the 2014. Yes, I think it was the 2014 elections, where first time in the political history of India that healthcare became an election agenda. And thereafter, whether it was a state or whether it was at the center, look at today, can you have an election in US? Why did Hillary Clinton lose? Hillary Clinton paid the penalty of the extra expenses that Barack Obama had a brilliant plan. I still consider Obama to be a messiah of healthcare. For a society so opulent and equally selfish as the United States, they will sell their grandmother but not pay $1 in tax. You've spoken to any of your American friends?
Yeah.
You give them an option, selling the grandmother and paying $1 extra in tax. The choice will be obvious, right? So no matter how much they were ecstatic about the social equality, Obama, world's greatest orator, colored president, whatever. As soon as he said, look, I want to cover 30% of US which doesn't have health care, they said, initially every news channel in US said, they all speak through their nose. Americans don't use the throat to speak. They said, fantastic, right? And as soon as the tax implications came on, right, who paid this? And Barack Obama did something very clever. He did it at the second term of his presidency. So the person carrying the can was Hillary Clinton, and then comes the apostle of mischief, Donald Trump, and he tried to undo, Obamacare thread by thread. Now, talking about NHS, we'll discuss it later, perhaps someday. But NHS is under tremendous stress. 120 billion pound sterling is I think the entire health budget of UK, which has a tenth of India's population. Their health budget is almost a quarter of India's GDP. Mammoth. But they are struggling. Because why? They are only at a single payee system, So it's only tax funded. And without going, I'm no great fan of Adolf Hitler, but the ones who have got the balance somewhere, the fiscal and the social objectives somewhat balanced, is probably something like the German model, where they have a constant supply coming in through your tax related plus depending upon your income, etc. So it gives you a variable component. But what I find very interesting in the German system is the government plays as the third umpire. They decide the tariff, they decide the rates, they decide how much is the break-even rate, and most hospitals are owned by not-for-profit trust. So today, like you take government of West Bengal, they are completely burdened with looking after the civic infrastructure, salaries of God knows how many lakh people who are employed in healthcare. Their government does not carry the civic burden, the manpower burden, all of that. So each hospital is like a self-administered trust. Each region cares for itself, which really in our system calls for decentralization.
I think at this point, this invigorating discussion where we have covered the trajectory of healthcare, about how our different systems have come about, the role of the corporate and the financial pressures has been insightful. And this excellent comparative analysis as well, which is there very lucidly presented in the book, makes for an excellent read. But we have so much more ground to cover, especially in a doctor-starved country like ours, where for more than 1,500 people we have only one doctor. The pressures that come with the profession, the pressures of being a woman in this field will be discussed in the next segment. Stay tuned.